Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. It is great to be live again this evening. It's been a while. I was hoping to do this more regularly. I was hoping to be consistent and be on here like every week or maybe every second week, but that's just life happens and things don't work out the way that you intend. And so it's been a while, but it's great to be back. Hi, Lorraine. I see you there. If there's anyone on the chat, you're welcome to just say hello. It's awesome to know who is joining us and also to join in, especially for the men. I mean, women as well. But if there's any questions specifically as we go along, you are welcome to ask questions. I can't have two earphones in because then I can't hear myself. So this evening, we're going to carry on with the conversation about what does it take to be a man? What does it mean to really be a man? And I have Jaco Botha joining me in a few minutes. He is waiting in the background, sipping on some coffee or something. I'm not sure what he's doing, but he is waiting in the background. He's going to be joining the conversation in a few minutes and just sharing from his own heart and his passion. It's something he's very passionate about, something that we together in our local church are busy talking about and seeing how do we empower, strengthen young men, older men, all men. So Jaco is going to be joining me. Jaco is a worship leader. He's a husband of one wife. He's an aspiring music artist and producer, sound producer. Well, not just sound, it's actually quite a few things. I don't know if he's going to share with us all the stuff he does, but so Jaco is in that whole realm of the creative industry with music, with video, with sound, with all of that stuff. But I think most of all, we're going to be speaking about his experience as a young man in terms of how he's journeyed with the Lord and into his own identity and all the things that go with that. So, this conversation is really about us opening up something around manhood and addressing some of the stuff, the stereotypes and the false stereotypes and the false ideas that keep coming up, I think, in social media, and not just in social media, but in the mainstream media. And there's so much pressure on young men on all sides. On one side, it's the pressure to be this perfect man in every way, and on the other side, there's all these pressures that say that if you veer out of a certain lane, according to what the culture and the norms have been set, then you are toxic in your masculinity. If you like anything that is remotely strong or masculine or powerful, then that's toxic and you need to veer away from that. And then in the middle of all of that, there is genuine issues around toxic masculinity. There's genuine issues around men who are abusing women, abusing children, not taking their rightful place. And those things are not actually addressed. Those things are not actually dealt with, but we are constantly finding that men who are truly trying to find their space in society and in the world are actually under attack and finding themselves more and more marginalized. So we want to speak into that. We want to encourage men, and we want to encourage you to join the conversation. You can join that on the chat. If you're watching this later, you can do that by posting a comment. And if there's a question in that comment or something that we can engage with, we will definitely try to do that. So I want to begin this evening before I welcome Jaco and ask him some questions about his experience. I want to just begin with a little teaching into this. And so we're going to turn in our Bibles to the book of Genesis, because it's always good to go back to the beginning, go back to some of the foundational things that God sets in place around our identity and around our purpose. And so when we come to Genesis chapter 2, we find again the narrative of the creation of mankind and the creation of Adam and his purpose that God gives him in relation to Eve and also in relation to God himself and in relation to creation. And so in verse 7 we read there, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground." He formed Adam, which means like dirt. It's from the same root word as dirt. He forms this dirt man out of the dirt, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living thing and a living being. And there's the first indication that this man, this creation, is not like the animals that were made. It's not like the rest of creation, because at no other point did God breathe his life into any of the creation. But this creation receives this incredibly special privilege of being breathed in the life of God. And then it says, "And God, the Lord God, planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he formed." So what does God do? He, up to this point, as the creation story has told us, God has created everything the theological terminology is ex nihilo, out of nothing, from just speaking. God just spoke, and it was, let there be light, let there be waters, and let there be animals. And so God spoke everything into creation up until this point. But here, God actually takes of his created order, and he specifically, personally goes and plants a garden. He creates a very specific, unique place, and it's into that garden, in the place called Eden, that the Lord then puts man. He puts him into this garden. And then if we go a little bit further down, we find some of that. We could read all of that, but let's jump down. Let's read verse 9. And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree to grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we see the context there of this garden. And then in verse 15, then the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to tend and to keep. And the Lord commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may eat freely, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you should not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. And in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, we see a different angle on the commands or the mandates of God, where he gives man these specific mandates, and then he says that they must expand into the rest, from Eden into the rest of creation. And we see there the seeds, as it were, the essence of what the kingdom of God is all about. I see you there, Robin. Great to have you with us. If anyone else is joining, post us a comment in the chat, then we know that you are with us this evening. And if there's questions or comments, go for it, fire away. We will try and answer those. So there's a couple of things here, like in this essence of the creation, in the essence of what God is forming in man. There's something that God establishes. There's an order that God establishes, and there's a structure that God establishes. And so if we jump back to chapter 1, verse 28, let's just read those few verses as well. It says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. And so God gives this command for Adam and Eve, not just to remain in this garden, but that what they produce, what they establish in that place, as they cultivate what God has given them, the resource God has given them, as they do that, so they begin to expand into the rest of creation. And so you see something of the very kingdom intention of God, that was always an expanding kingdom from a beginning point where that was established in the Word and in the presence of God, expanding outward to eventually take in the whole of creation. And so when we look at these verses, the question is, well, what is God saying about man in particular, and about men, and what is our role? What is our job? Is there some kind of significance here in these words? And there's a couple of things I want us to just pick up on when God says he puts him in the garden to tend and to keep. Those two words, to tend, can mean to cultivate, to work. It can mean to serve as well. These are all the different ways this word is used: cultivate, work, serve. To keep is the word guard, or to watch over, or to execute oversight. That's all the meanings of that word. When God says tend and keep, these are loaded words. And so in practice, what does this look like? It looks like a couple of things. It looks like, first of all, recognizing what it is that God has given you as a man, what it is that you have in your hands. And then it looks like taking those things and setting a border around them, establishing some kind of a order and a border in your life, and saying, this is where my responsibility lies, and that's where it doesn't lie. This is my area of influence, and that's not. And so there's a setting of an understanding of what it is that God has given, and by recognizing that, and that requires insight. It requires spiritual insight. It requires gratitude as well, because many people, all that they, or let's say men specifically, are not grateful for what they have. They're just complaining about what they don't have. They're not grateful for what it is that they have in their hands, and now saying, okay, this is my influence, this is my border, this is my sphere. Now what do I do with that? And then it goes on towards stewardship. Now you need to make the most of it. And this is not just speaking about resources, money, time, all those things, but it's speaking about relationships. It's speaking about your own heart. What are you doing with your heart? What are you doing with your own identity? and how are you stewarding that? And when you begin to steward and you become successful in stewarding that, then you can actually serve others and you can expand that. You can begin to actually influence the lives of other people around you that maybe are not aware of these things, or maybe struggling, or maybe in a space where they need someone to come alongside and mentor. Or maybe it's just your example. Maybe it's just by being there and picking others up and taking them with you. So I see all these things. I see in this command, it's something of recognizing who you are, what it is that God has given you, having an awareness, setting a boundary. What are healthy boundaries in your life? And then stewarding what God has given you in all the aspects of your life, your body, your energy, your time, and then serving those around you, because it's not about you, it's about being strong for others around you, and then expanding that into whatever sphere God has opened for you to expand that into. And so I just wanted to paint this picture of what is God's expectation of man? What does God require of a man? As we begin to have this conversation, I'm going to bring Jaco in a minute and just ask him a little bit about his own life and journey. But just to begin to open this conversation, because I think we need to have a basis of understanding what God's intention is and what God is expecting of us. How does God expect to empower us even? Because the thing that I want to come back to is that when God created man and when God gave these instructions, it said that God breathed his life into man. So this is not something that we can do in our own strength. It's not something that we have to sweep ourselves up and motivate ourselves and try and beat ourselves up or measure ourselves and compare ourselves with others. But it's something that we do by the empowering of the Holy Spirit. So I want to bring Jaco in. Jaco, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
How are you doing this evening?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me.
It's an awesome pleasure and privilege to have you on. And I mean, we've had this conversation a number of times. We've sat at the hub at different times and just spoken about a number of things. Firstly, I think the attack on young men and the attack on manhood and the identity that men are struggling to find. And we've spoken about our own journeys. And yeah, so just maybe some introductory comments on this. When we speak about this stuff, what does that stir in your heart? What does it stir for you?
Sure. It stirs a lot. I think one of the big things that a lot of people miss when they start talking about masculinity, lots of guys are really, really good at talking about, how to go hunting with a bow or how to shoot or do jiu-jitsu. But a big thing that I think a lot of people miss is the nurturing aspect, the stewarding aspect of masculinity. And you can see that there's such a hunger for it. If you think about, kids and their sports coaches, if they've got a male sports coach, how they just flock to them because there's a kind of a strong man who's busy nurturing them. And this nurturing, stewarding, looking after, protecting aspect of masculinity, I think is quite often actually, overlooked for the more glamorous, look at me, I'm strong, I can shoot, I can lift heavy weights, and I've got a six-pack and abs, and I can smoke a cigar and stand on a yacht. All things aside, that's not necessarily bad, but it's very hollow if you don't have the, why do you do that? It's so that you can nurture and protect and grow what your influence is, so that you can benefit your friends and your family. And I think that's what God really wants us to do is to we're not just doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for our family and for our community.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think, like you're saying, it's not necessarily bad to say, I want to have a yacht and I want to, take care of my health and all these things. And I think that's why a lot of these stereotypes that are being portrayed, young men they are drawn to that in some way, because there's something of an allure in that. But just maybe from your own example and your own experience, when you think about that in terms of that nurturing, that stewarding aspect, have there been some specific relationships with men that when you were younger that really inspired you in that way, that really were able to grab hold of your life when you were maybe we're all in that shaky stage where you could go any direction? Were there people like that for you that had a significant role?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was one of the guys that really had a big influence, especially in my teenage years. I think 15 years old, 14 years old, was I was going to the NG Church youth at the time, ATJ, and I think Kobus Oosthuizen was the youth leader, and he just used to come and pick us up, and we used to go do crazy things, like, hey, let's go explore the caves up in Clavelli, and then we would just go climb in caves with no idea where we were going and no idea how we would get out. We got stuck once, and just doing crazy stuff. But in doing that together, he would always share about like how he got saved and how his journey with God, how he got to the point of believing, and that that, like, I remember that very distinctly because, excuse me, my phone just rang. It's
okay. Just for the sake of any international listeners, these caves that Jaco is referring to are nothing like the caves that those soccer boys got lost in.
Oh no!
I don't think people would not struggle to find you if you were lost in these caves.
No.
They're pretty scary at times, but they're not that level.
They're just very narrow.
So he wasn't being irresponsible.
Well, that's debatable, but I think it was fun doing wild things with someone who was older, and what was really, really cool was Kobus was able to get us together, and we would go out as a group of young guys, and in the middle of the hike he'd just kind of start asking us questions and start kind of guiding us and nudging us in a healthy direction, which is something that I think thinking back had such a big impact on my life. I think that, and then actually quite recently, I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu about 2 years ago, and one of the coaches is a friend of mine. He's by the name of Don. He coached at the gym that I was now. He's a guy you don't want to mess with, like world Muay Thai champ and pro MMA fighter. But what was really, really awesome to see was when he was coaching is how he was like, really gentle with the people that he was coaching, and if they were doing something wrong, he would go correct them and help them. And it was amazing when all of the younger guys, especially in the room, would see this dude who's like this, who's like a real life Clint Eastwood, coming and helping someone who's not doing it right, who's a beginner, and guiding them and stewarding them, nurturing them to help them get better at the craft that he's really, really good at. It kind of set off. You could see all of the guys were like, they were like, oh wow, this is cool. You can be both, savage and servant. Sorry, that's a very cheesy analogy, but
could be the title of your book, Jaco.
Savage.
But it's
servant.
a good. I mean, I think you touched on something that's really profound there. Is the fact that I think a lot of the confusion comes for young men, like that. This idea that being powerful, that's toxic.
Yeah.
And being a good man in what the expectations of the world is that you must be this sort of limp nothing, because if you're anything other than that, you're toxic. But actually being able to be powerful for the sake of others. In other words, not just to protect, not just to be able to stand up in a dangerous situation, but actually be powerful because you're able to teach, you're able to equip, you're able to pass on something of value that people are looking at you for strength. And I think something of that, that scripture I was just quoting from, where God says, tend, guard, keep, there's something of that oversight role, which I think, when that's not present especially in a young man's life, when there isn't another male figure who's actually exercising oversight in a way that gives a space for them to make mistakes, but there's power as well there, I think that's lacking. And I think that's where a lot of young men are finding themselves just in an emptiness, because you don't find that on social media. You have to find that in actual relationships.
No. And also, I think, like you were saying, that there's nothing wrong with being strong, but also guys need to see that nurturing and looking after and tending and caring for someone is not a sign of weakness, because I think that is like very often something we associate with someone who's feminine. So seeing someone who is strong but nurturing at the same time is incredibly powerful. So if you have like that's what I think I was talking about earlier, if you have a sports coach who wants the best for you, is trying to help you, is guiding you, that it's like a very profound relationship, especially for a lot of young guys, because here's someone who's fitter, faster, stronger than them, but they're telling them and coaching them and guiding them in the right direction. So yeah, I think that, you need to realize, like, okay, being strong is not bad, it's good, but also being nurturing and caring for others is also good. I think a lot of the time what we do is we think of, you want to take care or tend to something. No, that's what we give to women. Women look after the children and stuff. We go do manly things. And if I think a good analogy is to use, if you're a farmer, if you think about a cowboy, you don't think about someone who's like nurturing, but all they do is tend to their flocks,
to animals,
all day. So they're constantly nurturing, protecting, looking after, making sure that their cattle have got what they need, making sure they've got food, making sure that they're safe, looking after the babies, delivering the babies at 3:00 in the morning. And that's a very, if you think about stereotypical manliness, I think a cowboy is a pretty prime example.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any farmer, I mean, some of the toughest people on the planet.
Yeah.
And their strength is mainly in caring and in nurturing. And I mean, I've seen some farmers get pretty emotional about animals dying when it happens all the time, but there's still an attachment to this role. And I think that's the other thing. It's the converse of that, is that you don't have to be the toughest, strongest guy, but actually, if you as a man take your role in society, wherever you're positioned, and you see that as the opportunity to serve others, in other words, to build others up, to nurture, to strengthen, to impart something, I think then you're beginning to grasp what it means to be really in the framework of what God is calling for a man to be. I'm just picking up here, Robin is making a comment, nurturing is best done by example rather than words. Absolutely. And I see you there, Munya. It's great to have you with us. Munya's also had some of these conversations with us. Just touching on another aspect of this for you, Jaco, and I mean, we'll probably circle around back to some of the stuff we've just said, because there's a lot there. But I'm just thinking of the whole area of God giving Adam, he gives him a space, he gives him an area, and in that is implied that there's boundaries. There's healthy boundaries in life. How have you found that for you? Have there been role models as well for how to set boundaries and how to operate in society within healthy boundaries with relationships? Because I think sometimes that's where people can be abused or can allow others to abuse them. Because I think the other side of it is not that the sort of idea of Jesus even is that Jesus was just meek and mild and people just walked over him and he had no boundaries, and I think people, if we take that view of him and we say we need to follow his example, you might end up being a man who's actually been burnt out and destroyed because you just allow things to happen to you. You just allow whatever people impose on you, you just accept that in the name of serving or caring or being like Jesus. So I don't know what your example is of that and how you've set boundaries in your life and how you view that.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, have I had good relationships with boundaries and stuff? And yes, I'm very lucky to have a really great dad. So I've got two younger brothers. So that's, and my dad was strict but very loving. So, he wasn't, like if you broke a window or whatever, it wasn't the end of the world. You might get in trouble for doing something silly, but where there were like very strict rules was especially around my mom. Like if you wanted to inflict serious pain and suffering upon yourself, backchat my mom. Because my dad would then just come down on you like a ton of bricks. And you see it, you still, I'm 31, my brother's 29 and 26. And like the way that we treat women today is reflective of that relationship, because my dad was like, no, women are to be protected, they're to be served, they're to be loved, cherished. You put women and children above yourself. So that I think is very healthy. And I think that there need to be rules there, especially when it comes to how you're treating other people. Obviously we need to, I think like each parent needs to decide exactly what rules they want to enforce in the house, and I'm not going to go into that. I'm not a parent yet, so but for me, I remember especially like if I did something that was like really horrible to my brothers or to my mom, that was actually when like discipline was handed down. That's when you could like be like, no, this is not something you do. You don't talk to your mother. You don't talk to women like that. That's not something that we do. And it was, if you push those boundaries as a young boy, it's kind of scary because now you have this, like, my dad's big. I'm 6'5", my dad's 6'3", 120 kilos, and he's angry because you've upset, my mom. And my dad like never abused us. He was never violent or, he wouldn't beat us or anything like that. But it was just very, very clear this is a boundary and you're not crossing it. And I think that's really, really good. And like I said, I think it's great because you see that in the way that myself and my brothers treat women and how we treat children and how we don't tolerate, if there's anyone that like wants to, for instance, abuse a woman or hit a woman, I would just make 2 phone calls and then, we would go sort that guy out very quickly because that's not something that I tolerate. So I don't hang around people that do that. I don't even know anyone like that because I don't want to have anything to do with them. And I think that's directly because of the rules and the boundaries that my dad instilled in us from a very, very young age. So yeah,
and it's kind of sad in society. I know you've got another part to that, but it's sad that we live in a world where because actually, and I think that's the problem with some of the conversations around toxic masculinity, because what is trying to be squashed sometimes is often the thing that is actually needed, the strength that's needed to say in society, if society creates a structure and an order where good men are standing up to protect women and children and using force if needed to do that, that's the kind of society you want to be in. But at the moment, it's sort of like we don't want anything of that nature. We want to sort of try and make society this numb place. And the reality is, it actually is, I think, is creating more and more men who are actually becoming dangerous and violent and don't know boundaries.
Yeah, and I think it has. I think a big part of that is you wanting men to be safe, so you don't want them to be dangerous, and so you're wanting to intentionally keep them weak. And I think that is very dangerous because I would much rather be around a guy that is, that is really well trained. It's a black belt in jiu-jitsu that really knows how to fight, but he knows how to control it, than be around someone who doesn't know how to channel or control their aggression or their anger. But then when they get pushed past the edge, then go on a rampage. And you see this all the time with these like a road rage incidents. A guy pulls out, cuts in front of another guy, and then the dude gets out the car and like beats the person half to death because they've never learned how to handle that anger. And I think that that's something that we need men who know how to do that to teach like boys growing up, because I think that would prevent a lot of abuse. Because then what you're doing is you're teaching young men, and this is especially good for aggressive boys. Like if you've got a young boy who's a teenager who's aggressive, one of the best things that you can do for him is actually send him to a jiu-jitsu class, because he's going to learn how to channel that and he's going to learn how to control it. So he's going to learn how to control his aggression. Whereas if you just say, don't be aggressive, avoid it, you're essentially avoiding a part of your character. And guess what? One day that button's going to get pushed, and then it's going to explode, and it's going to be horrible because you have no control of it. So this is something that I think that that this is where you need like a strong, good man, who's in touch with that part of his character, has integrated it into his character and knows how to control it, to teach younger boys, especially boys, like, hey, listen, you don't freak out and lose your marbles when a woman is angry at you, or when somebody says something you at a bar, or some guy flips you off in traffic. It's not an appropriate time to get upset.
But I think, yeah, absolutely. I think as well, like what you're saying is that's nurtured. It's something that's an example that's set over time in relationship. And I think coming back to the point Robin was making is it's examples rather than words, because it's very difficult to instruct a man in the way that he should go. Because I think what happens then is, I think what a lot of men are feeling is a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of rejection on maybe all fronts. You've got men who feel that they're not masculine enough. You've got men who feel that they've been rejected because of mistakes that they've made. so within that framework, men are just sort of, I think, in some ways disconnecting from society. I remember just recently speaking to a gentleman who's got a real heart for men's ministry, and he was saying so many of the men his age, and he was speaking in that 50, 60 category, he says they just do not have another man that they can talk to. They're just not communicating about anything that is actually troubling them or stirring in their hearts, and it's almost like that's becoming more and more prevalent because of the way that society is fragmented and the wrong messages that are being sent. I don't know if there's something else you want to say on that. I've got another question, but if there's something you wanted to pick up on that, because I know I cut you off a little bit earlier.
No stress. I think the one thing I would like to say is just that this is something, it's touchy, and this might, offend any ladies listening, but this is, what we're talking about, like nurturing, especially younger men, in how to kind of control that anger, aggression. And it's not just younger men, it's men of all ages. It's not something that women can teach men. So like, it's not something that and this is why you need fathers in the house, because like a single mom is not going to be able to teach a teenage son how to control his aggression. It's just not, I don't know what it is. That's something that I think God has designed men, like we need to be there to kind of be that shield in and around women. And I think that's just the one thing that I'd like to say. The reason why I think like myself and my brothers behave the way that we do, especially in regards to how we treat women, is because of what my dad showed and taught us.
Yeah,
it wasn't.
And I think if you've got young men who are growing up in single mother households, which is more and more a reality, and so you've got this problem that is it's getting worse exponentially, because that then breeds the same thing. You really do need places in the community where those young men can find role models that are the right kinds of role models, because the reality is they are going to find role models. They're going to find it somewhere, but it's a question of who do they look to as a role model. And I think that's probably the thing that's stirring for me with this conversation, is if they look to social media or if they look in their own community, often the role models they're going to find are going to be very negative examples. And so that's a real challenge, I think, for us as a church. And I'm not just saying our church, but the church in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Snoop Dogg, the rapper, I'm sure you all know who he is. When he talks about his teen, so he grew up in a single household. He didn't know his dad, and he, ended up being a Crip, gangsterism, dealing drugs out of his grandma's house. And he said that if he had a good male influence in his life at that time, he wouldn't have gone down that road. And so I think, as like the church, we need to be like very aware of that, because guys are looking for that influence, and so they're going to open their phones and start looking, and if there's not a godly example of like, hey, this is a good strong man that they can draw to, they're going to go to the Andrew Tates of the world and the Dan Bilzerians and all of that, because hey, that guy's big, he's rich, he's got lots of girls, he's got a yacht, he's got a Bugatti, all of that. But I think that's he's only got a part of it right. He doesn't. Yeah. It's not a godly. It's not a godly and biblical view of masculinity. So yeah.
And it will. I mean, for all the things that might look good on the appearance of those things, we know and we've seen even that those things become destructive in and of themselves.
Yeah,
they don't lead to the kind of life that is fruitful, with multiple generations. Because I think one of the things I mentioned in the scripture I touched on last time we were speaking, when I was speaking with Sheldon, it was about this picture of like a tree, of an oak of righteousness, and to me that shows something that is multi-generational.
Yeah,
it's something that if you're really a man who has got an integrity and a character, and you're walking and you're stewarding well, and you're doing these things, it's not just going to be for your benefit, but it has to have a knock-on effect into the next generation and the generation after that. And I think that for me is one of the almost like the signs of a great man, is when you see a grandfather with their family around them, and also their standing in society, and they're a respected person who has stayed faithful to their wife, and there's their children, and there's their grandchildren, and these are the other people in the community that their life has touched, and those are the children they taught when they were a Sunday school teacher, whatever but there's this legacy that is being left. They're an oak.
Yeah.
There's something there that is beyond their own life. And I don't think, I know those role models that are often out there, they don't have that. There's no legacy. It's just all about self.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the big difference that we need to look for, and be teaching young men.
Yeah, there's a quote from one of my favorite series, Sons of Anarchy, which is, just by the name you can hear that it's not exactly a Christian series, but the guy who's the head of the motorcycle club, Jax Teller, says in the one, he has like these monologues at the beginning of every episode, which is him writing in his diary. And he wrote this part, which I thought was one of the most profound lines I've ever heard in any form of art. He says, boys face inward, their focus is themselves, but men face outward, they're serving others. And I thought, like, oh wow, that's incredible, because if you look at a lot of these things, it's about like, I want to drive a nice car, I want to have all the girls, I want to have a yacht, and then the shift is actually, no, I want to go serve my wife, my family, my kids, my community. I think that's a really, really like good, one-liner to kind of summarize the difference in attitude I think that we need to have versus the world. It's not about us. It's about our family. It's about God. It's about our community, and the impact we can have and leave to our children and their children and their children.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, there's quite a few things I wanted to pick up on still, but I'm realizing as well we're running out of time. And I think that line, so we might pick up this conversation. This is for me as an ongoing conversation, because there's so much here that we can unpack. But I think that line that you've given there, which is quite profound from a show like that, is a really powerful way to sum it up, because at every turn that I've looked, and even we were looking at, how do we ask God for things, and looking at the example of Solomon, and when Solomon asked for wisdom, it was so that he could serve the people. It wasn't so that he could be the most impressive dude around. It was so that he could serve the people, and he saw himself as less than the great people of God. And so I think that is a big part of this, this thing of recognizing and setting a border and stewarding what God gives us. It's actually realizing my role in society as a man is not for myself. It's not to work a job, have a hobby, sit on the couch and have a wife that serves me, and I just I just sort of like go through life trying to see what I can get. But it's actually how am I empowered? How have I been blessed so that I can actually have an impact, that I can actually serve into other people's lives, especially men's lives, but also women and children? Because I think that kind of a man gives a lot of strength to those around him who are maybe vulnerable or are lacking confidence or lacking security. A man like that in society can be incredible strength to many, many people around him.
Yeah. And I think if you've got a community where the men are all like that, then you'll see one of the fruits that you'll see there is that the women and children like flourish, because it's safe for them, and they know that they're protected, and they've got like a barrier and a shield around them. So it's very much like if the shepherd's good, the sheep aren't worrying about what they're going to eat, or if the wolf's going to get them, because they know that the shepherd's there kind of making sure that they're safe. And I think that's also quite a good analogy to think of it. So I just want to pick up quickly on two comments here. Robin, and I don't know if you want to comment on these, but Robin making the point that high levels of impulsivity have their origin in the first 1,000 days of life. Which is obviously that's a reality, but I think it doesn't mean that those things cannot be nurtured. That boys who come from that kind of environment, and girls, but we're specifically speaking about boys, I suppose, today, cannot be nurtured in a different way and shown a different example. And as hard as it is to undo that, I think there is scope for that.
And then Ham makes a comment: a man lives to serve the benefit I think he says means to the benefit of others, which is exactly what we're saying. And I think that that summarizes for me what, if you ask the question, what does God require of a man? It's be strong in the Lord so that you can be strong for others. That sort of summarizes it, and it doesn't mean even that you have to be physically strong, although that's a good part of it. And I think there's a reason why being physically strong is good, because you can, ask me, I've got a strong young boy, and if I don't stay fit, he literally runs circles around me. And if I try and play rugby with him in the garden, I get injured when he tackles me, and he doesn't get injured when I tackle him. So there's actually practical reasons for why it's good to stay fit. But even beyond just physical fitness, that strength is actually to be able to serve others. So I don't know, Jaco, you want to pick up on some of those and just share some of your final thoughts and comments, and we'll pick this conversation up again.
I think, being strong for others, it's not necessarily only physical strength. I think there was a devotional I did, which is by the guy, I think he did... I've forgotten what his name was, but his podcast's name is Undaunted Life, and he defines it as building physical, spiritual, and mental resilience. He doesn't say necessarily strength, because I think a lot of the time as a man, our role, it's like, if you've ever try to grow a tree, a fruit tree, it's not easy. It's difficult, because you have to give the thing water every day. You have to go check on it every day. It's like this constant discipline. Sometimes it's very monotonous, and it requires, it's very easy to just kind of say, oh, bugger that, I'm just going to go play games. But that's, now you're not looking after the tree. So that's a very simple example, but I think a lot of the times, if you're a dad and you've got I think of my father, who wanted a motorbike for as long as I can remember, but there was always, cricket kit to buy and, school outings to pay for and that. So he just kept on denying himself for not like a little bit, for decades, until eventually basically we were all out of school. And then he was like, okay, cool, I'm going to get a motorbike now. And I think that takes a tremendous amount of strength. It might not be in terms of what we define as physical strength, like, hey, I'm going to go lift heavy weights, but the mental resilience it takes to constantly deny yourself for the sake of your family is something that I think is a lot more difficult than you would expect, because it's not like you do it for a month or two. It's going to be basically day in, day out for the rest of your life. And I think that God really blesses that, because that's where, that, and you were talking about the oak tree, that's where the generational, kind of blessing, you start seeing the grandchildren flourishing of the dad who was walking in that, in that, like self-discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something maybe we can pick up on next time, is just how do we do that? Because I think unless we are empowered by the Spirit, and I mean, that's your dad's testimony, and I think many of us who've had godly men around us, we've seen how the Spirit have empowered men to be able to be not selfless, because I think that's almost setting a bar. If we start saying that, people think, oh, you mean you deny yourself completely? Well, that's the point, but we never get there. But it's an empowering to be like that, to be able to resist what it is that is your impulse, or what is just for yourself, and actually think of what is for the benefit of my children and my own family, but then also the family doesn't stop there. It's even what is the benefit of my community, my church. How can I serve this person that's in front of me that is in lack right now? So that's an awesome way to close it off. Jaco, thank you for being willing to share some of your own journey and stories and insights. I enjoy always chatting with you about this stuff. So it's cool to do it on this platform where other people get to be part of the conversation. And guys, we will be doing this some more. I really do want to get into this more regularly. So I'm sure Jaco will be back. Sheldon will be back at some point. There'll be some other guys. Maybe we'll even have a panel of guys.
That sounds good.
Talking about this stuff. I think it's really cool. We can even maybe sit around and smoke a cigar while we do it. We might get in trouble.
I've got a whole bunch.
But Jaco, I'm going to give you an opportunity to shamelessly plug. Do you have places that people, if someone wants to listen to your music or find you on YouTube, where do they do that?
Yeah, so I am songwriter, music producer. Obviously, I lead worship at Connections, and my kind of musical artistry expression, it goes under the stage name of Lanky Jake. So yeah, if you just search for that, it's a very unusual name. So whatever platform you're on, you can find me. It's on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, everything like that. So yeah, if you want to check out what I do, you're welcome to do that. Thanks, Martin.
Cool. Thanks, Jaco. And we'll put I think what we'll do is we'll put some links down. I'll do that afterwards in the description. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for all the engagement. Thank you, Robin, Ham, for your engagement, and the others who were there. And yeah, if there's any questions, if you're watching this afterwards and you're not able to engage live, post a comment in the comments. Even if it's just a comment, we'll try and engage with it next time. If it's a question, we'll genuinely try and answer the question. We don't know if we will be able to, but we'll do our best. And this is a conversation, because I think there's many, many different facets to the stuff we're speaking about. So we don't pretend that we know all the answers or have everything figured out. But I think as we converse about it, that's when things come to light. And I think there's some things that have even just sparked for me, just listening to you. And we've spoken about this stuff before, but even just tonight, there's some things that just, again, they just resonate. And then it's like, that makes sense. That's the thing. So that's really helpful. So thank you, Jaco.
Yeah, thanks, Martin.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us, guys. Have a great evening, and we'll see you guys soon. I'm trying to find my mouse has disappeared. There we go. Okay, cheers, guys. See you all soon.
Everyone.